5. And to give everybody an idea, stage 6 is basically revolution, war. It's the violent restructuring of the economy. And whether we're in the 7th inning of stage 5 or the 3rd inning, I don't know. But the fact that we're in stage 5, which is obviously where there's massive internal conflict, which rings way too true, and the massive disparities, which you did a really cool graph in your video where you show income inequality and that gap between the lines you filled in with resentment. And so you have growing resentment, you get populists on the left and the right, you get internal conflict, people fighting, and then you get a potential external power looking at you going, they're weakened by their internal conflict. And that historically is when a rising power makes its move.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 things, 3 big forces to keep your eye on. And when you see them in their cycle, then it's clear. First, are you earning more than you are spending?
And do you want people to look at this at an individual level or at a country level?
Well, you can at both. I want them to look at it as the country, but the country's nothing more than the aggregate of the people. And so when you look at those 3 forces, I want to make sure that they're clear and you could align them up and you could see where you are. Is the country earning more than it's spending and building savings? Or is it spending more than it is earning and creating debt? Because one man's debts are another man's assets. And when somebody is holding those assets and they're producing a lot more of that money in debt, they go down in value. Money goes down in value as they produce it to produce that buying power. And then that gets people bad returns. It produces a higher amount of inflation, and it produces bad returns for holding debt or bond. So in other words, cash or bonds, and then people get out of cash and bonds, and that produces rising interest rates while there's rising inflation, and that produces stagflation. So I want them to get the mechanics of that because that's happening now. You could see it. This is not controversial. We are producing a lot of debt. We're spending a lot more than we're earning. And as a result, they're printing a lot of money. And the printing of a lot of money creates a lot of inflation. And with that inflation, then nobody wants to, cash is trash. You don't want to hold cash. And you get out of that. And that causes rates to rise. And that's one of those 3 factors. So you can see it happening. And you could also see the cycle of it as shown in the book. The second force that is dealing with is the internal conflict force, how you are with each other. Are you operating cohesively, common mission, and moving in the right direction, the system working? Or are you at each other's throats? Is the system threatened? Because history's shown when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And that is a risky situation. It's a risky situation because it produces disorder and it can produce a form of civil war. And at those times, when you have that, you see greater and greater polarity. In politics, it shows up at greater and greater populism of the left and populism of the right. And populists want to fight for their side. They're not moderates. Moderates want to work together to try to find a compromise that's best for the whole. Populists appeal to their crowd by saying, I am fighting for you. And they will fight each other. And that fight can be at the threat of the system. So in history, for example, we saw 4 democracies in the 1930s choose to become dictatorships as one side fights to the other because they become so disorderly. And we have a system right now that you could see that it is possible in elections that neither side might accept losing. And so the system becomes in jeopardy. And you see that the moderates leave the system. You can't be moderate. You have to pick a side and fight. And so you see this in the French Revolution. There were moderates in the early part of it, that recognizing that there were problems and wanting to work together. The moderates got guillotined. The polarity began. The same was true in the Russian Revolution. The same was true in the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and so on. Those polarity gets greater and greater as there's a greater intensity to fight. And that is the internal piece. And so you could see where we are in that internal piece. Right now, we see that moderates are dropping out of, choosing not to run for re-election. And you're seeing in the primary system that the fight is who's over most extreme in representing that. And you're seeing this greater polarity. And you see it reflected in many statistics. Something like 10 or 15%, I forgot if it's 10% of the Democrats or if it's 10% of the Republicans, I don't remember, versus 15% wish the members of the other party would die. They don't want them to measure their, they don't want them to marry their children. I mean, there is a great polarity. And you're seeing that lead to changes in where people live. They're moving to different areas, not just because of tax reasons, but because of differences in values. And so that kind of, you can see it today happening, these things, but you also can see the arc of them in the book because it measures statistics. It shows these things happening. So when you have a financial problems and you have this kind of polarity and you have a bad time, you have a lot of fighting internally. So imagine where we are in the economic cycle. We're in the part of the economic cycle where they have given, the government has given a lot of money and credit to people. They've put it out. Well, no surprise, that's leading to a lot of inflation, okay? Inflation takes buying power away from people. And it also means that then there's going to be higher interest rates, and that's going to squeeze people. And so that makes that wealth gap and that wealth issue more difficult. So that's the second force. And the third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. Because when the power of a country diminishes, okay, when we get weaker financially or how we are with each other and so on, there are greater vulnerabilities. And there's always the competitive power that learns how to become stronger. And competition always happens. There's the establishment and then there's the new competition. And as they get stronger in all ways, militarily and commercially and so on. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing.
Yeah, so we've got Taiwan looming in the sort of political background. You said many times in the book that that's an indicator that you'd really be looking at if there was a fourth skirmish over Taiwan, that you would get increasingly worried. We definitely need to talk about inflation in a minute because I want to know what people should be doing in that environment. But first, and I don't know if people are like me, but the thing that got me to stop and really start paying attention to this was how far into stage 5 we are. That was the thing that compelled me that I have to slow down. I really have to look at this because I actually don't like thinking about money despite my long-standing pursuit of success. That's really been about something else for me. Money's been a byproduct of that. And that's in the book, and I don't know if your number has changed, but in the book you say that you give a 30% chance of the US falling into civil war, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, and that a major conflict with China at 35% in the next 10 years. And you said, look, it's a guess, but you lay out a lot of data before you say that it's just a guess. So it's obviously a very well-informed guess. One, do those numbers roughly hold for you still? And if they do, how do we pump the brakes on this?
I would say that those numbers probably are a little bit higher now, I would say.
I was afraid you'd say that.
Things are progressing a little bit quicker. Do
you mind ballparking me? If we're not at 30, are we 31? Are we 40?
Yeah, let's say 35 to 40% on on each, let's say.
Woof.
And I'm not I'm not being precise, but the
Sure.
events that happened in the Ukraine, and that is bringing all this development internationally up at a little bit quicker pace. It's the same dynamic. There are two sides, and there'll be neutral countries, just like in the war. There was the Allies and the Axis powers, and then there would be neutral countries. And so that part is developing. The U.S. Conflict part is probably progressing a little bit quicker. So, I mean, let's say the odds of that. On the world order, the developments in the Ukraine, maybe I should put those in perspective. Would you like me to do that?
Please, absolutely.
Okay. There is a very close relationship, a common objective of the Russians and the Chinese. So there is a competition in the world, and there's a dominant world power which is perceived as being overly controlling. So the Chinese believe that the policy of containment of the United States, in other words, just right within their borders, that there isn't a region that's suitable for them, in much the same way as the United States. There's always a geographic region that is an area of influence. The United States in the area like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba, when there's a threatening power in Cuba, we reacted to that. That kind of geopolitics, they believe that the United States is sort of containing them, and they are growing in power, so that there's that dynamic. And Russia has the same kind of view, and so that there's a common, let's call it enemy, competitor. And there are 5 types of wars. There's a trade war, there's a technology war, there's a geopolitical influence war, there is a capital war, and then there's a military shooting war. And we are in the first 4 of those wars in this competition.
With China or with Russia?
With China. Well, we're not in a shooting war with China. We are in a shooting war of sorts with Russia and the Ukraine. We're providing arms, and so they're shooting. And so there's a military war going on, and we're in it in our way.
What do you guys think? Do you think Ray Dalio is right with his perspective and his analysis? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.